This is the first video in a series that will go over the 27 plot points of the 27 plot point outline. The main playlist for this is the outline playlist, which actually just goes over utilizing the 27 plot point, breaking down the acts. And now I'm going to break down each specific plot point with a video. This first video is plot point 1 and all about plot point 1, the ordinary world. With that said, in the early stages of an outline and a story, the plot point 1, the ordinary world, is the foundation of your narrative. It's the place where your protagonist begins, and it sets the emotional tone for everything that follows. It's where we establish who the protagonist is before the journey starts, giving readers a sense of normalcy or status quo before things get disrupted. What does this mean for your story? And that's what we're going to go over today about crafting the ordinary world that hooks the readers from the start. But you're probably saying, Tom, you know what? I don't know what plot point 1 in the ordinary, what is that? What is that? Well, the ordinary world before the disruption introduces us to the ordinary world of the protagonist before any major disruptions occur. This doesn't mean they can't be involved in disruptions, i.e., we'll talk about Saving Private Ryan, things like that. You can be within conflict, but that conflict sets your ordinary world. So think of plot point 1 as just introducing the status quo of your character, okay? Before that ordinary world, whatever it is for them, is disrupted. This is the moment where you, as the writer, set the stage for what normal looks like in your character's life. The ordinary world establishes context, showing us who the protagonist is, what their daily life entails, their hopes, struggles, relationships, and perhaps most importantly, their flaws. This is the baseline that everything else will be built upon, and it's crucial for making the up and coming changes feel impactful. It gives more strength to the inciting incident, to the midpoint conflict, and ultimately to the resolution. The more the readers understand and connect with the ordinary world of your protagonist, the more they'll feel the weight of the disruption when it hits. The first plot point, known as the ordinary world before the disruption, is going to start your narrative. It represents the protagonist's life before anything significant happens. It's all about their normal routines, their normal relationships, and what they want out of life. So let's talk about the foundation of your narrative and basically what it's made up of, okay? Number 1, establishing normalcy and routine. Okay, a lot of this is going to be about the value of who they are before what happens disrupts them, right? So establishing normalcy and routine. The ordinary world should clearly illustrate what the protagonist's normal life, is like, giving readers a sense of routine and stability. This allows a reader to appreciate how much the protagonist's life changes once the disruption occurs. It doesn't mean you have to write long, mundane scenes, but it does mean you have to give your readers enough detail to understand what is considered normal for your character. As an example, imagine Sophie, who lives a quiet life as a librarian. Her routine is predictable. She wakes up, tends to her plants, goes to work, and spends her evenings reading. The ordinary world should give us enough of this context to understand who she is before her life takes a drastic change. More importantly, if you read the template that I have, which is called the 27 plot point outline template with explanations, you'll see a basic example there too for each plot point. So the first plot point there is Jane, a career-focused architect, is living a predictable life, balancing her demanding job and her quirky friends in a bustling city. That means, as a general thought, now you have to take your chapters and establish those points. You have to establish Jen is career-focused and she works in architecture. You have to represent in the chapters that she's living a very predictable life. There's no excitement to it. She's just, my work is my work. You have to explain the balance between her demanding job and her quirky friends in a bustling city. So you have to show the bustling city. You have to show her relationships with friends. And that becomes her status quo, her ordinary world. Okay. So, with that said, uh, the next thing you want to do is introduce character traits and flaws, or basically where they stand, their positions. What things would you consider? And by the way, again, when you're creating characters, you don't always want to list out things. You want to allow the narrative to kind of dictate what's going on. So basically, if they're always able to kind of get through a situation or a scene with no issue, it's good to go back and be like, well, what can I put here to distract or push back on the character or make it a little bit more challenging for them? Right? Maybe they seem too smart. So let's kind of like maybe they're not super smart or super quote unquote dumb. They're just you know, they're naive, but they're able to pick up on things. So now you change that scene where they're having a harder time kind of understanding what's going on. It takes them a second, then they grasp the concept instead of being the one with all the answers. It's little things like that that help establish their baseline and where they can be challenged in the second plot point, let alone throughout the rest of the narrative. So, introducing your character traits and flaws, this is where you're going to reveal aspects of the protagonist's personality, including their positions, their flaws, and any traits that you want to achieve here, right? So, the reason we do that though is empathy comes from where we so the more we understand where a person stands position wise, like what their beliefs are, what their motivations are, and what even their subconsciousness or their self-consciousness is on their flaws, it creates an empathy relationship, right? Relationship and empathy, right? Because the flaws in particular are important because they often become obstacles. That's so important. It's so important to have obstacles. Nothing should come easy, even if it doesn't, like, it doesn't have to be world ending hard, but when it's easy, you take away the story. You need them to figure out things and make choices. And that's what becomes interesting about a narrative, right? And it's those flaws that allow protagonists to have to overcome these obstacles during the narrative, which creates the story, right? Because remember, narratives are made up of plot and story. Plot is what needs to happen no matter what, and story is how it unfolds emotionally through the character's experience and choices. Now, again, a flaw doesn't have to be that they can't add or subtract, or that they're really, 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 really dumb. Okay, flaws can be that they're, you know, they're confident. Okay, maybe you want to play with flaws in a way that isn't always obvious. Also, right? So maybe they're flighty. Maybe they're always late. Maybe they have OCD. Um, maybe they're too nice and they get walked on a lot. Right? So you know, it's things like that that help you say, well, maybe the character hesitates on taking risks. Maybe they prefer the safety of I'm going to just go to work, come home, read my book, or I'm going to go to work, come home, and just hang out with my friends, whatever the case may be, right? They don't want to really disturb their status quo, their comfortability. They don't have that courage to take chances. That's a flaw. It also might look like a strength, though. Wow, they focus on their job, they go home, they stay out of trouble, but really, maybe they just don't. They don't have that urge. They can't break out of their comfort zone, which sets up walls. All right. Next, you definitely want to set up relationships and stakes. Okay, what's at stake is as important as who they are with other people. So the ordinary world is where you would introduce the relationships that matter most to your protagonist, not the stranger down the block that they've never met but only once, but friends, family, colleagues, even pets. Okay. This helps establish what's at stake and who will be impacted by the protagonist's journey. Now, obviously, the more attached readers become to these elements, to the stakes or the relationships themselves, the more they will care when things are disrupted. I would recommend when you're working on your narrative, okay, and you're adding characters, if the character isn't in the narrative for a long period of time, all right, but you use them to bestow an important moment, you might not need them. You might be able to get away with allowing that truth, that importance to be placed onto a character that is in your narrative more. And the reason you do this is because remember, your word count is your budget. Just like in a film, your word count, your page count, your line count, because every eighth of a page is considered money, right? You want to say, all right, well, 120 pages is a 2-hour movie that I got to pay for, right? So when you're writing a book, think of your word count as your budget. Do you want to spend your budget on a character that's really only there once but takes up a lot of space? Right? And you could say, maybe instead of having this waiter say something profound. Now, if a character is being set up for, say, a series or is a part of not just the series, but say that world or that universe, like a connecting figure, that's different. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about like the waiter. Like the waiter comes in and goes, "Oh, Marianne paid for that for you." And then they're like, "Marianne?" They're like, "Yeah, she said to tell you about the dog." And then they're, "Oh, the dog." And then they get up and they go and they talk to Marianne. And the waiter was there to get this character to Marianne. Like maybe we don't. Oh, maybe you don't need Marianne, the waiter, but at the same time, you're like, yeah, but that's a cute, nice little moment. So you have to find out what works and doesn't work when it comes to relationships. Because the more a relationship has an impact on the narrative, the more you have to put into them. That doesn't mean they have to be on the page more. It just means give them weight. Don't let them just be a figure that walks in. It's like, hey, I'm here to give you information. And then I got to go. You want them to have weight. So even like a mother cat, like if a character is a mother or a father or a parent, whatever, and they're only in one scene, in that scene, make sure they have weight. Make sure they have a dimension to them that is more than one. You know what I'm saying? Make sure they, even in that scene, you want characters to come in and have an impact. All right. The waiter, I would recommend not really putting a lot of weight into, right? But if there is a character that's going to influence your narrative, this is where you would set up their value to that character. So, for example, let's go back to the parent. Maybe the parent comes in at the midpoint conflict or near the end of the story. In the ordinary world, you would set up or see the fact that they miss their parent, or they could be on the phone with their parent and they talk to the parent all the time. We don't hear the parent or interact with them, but the character is on the phone, or maybe they say to another character, "Oh, I just talked to my mom the other day, and she was saying, I should visit more. I haven't visited in a while, because I've been focused on my career." You're seeding and setting up that character, adding dimensions to that character, especially if the main protagonist is using lessons or ideas from a character that we haven't seen. You still give that unseen character weight. So relationships are very important, okay? Because those relationships, how you define them and the weight and the dimension you give to those relationships, instill the stakes. How important is this relationship? Are they willing to listen or sacrifice for this relationship? Stuff like that. And the other thing is, when it comes to the stakes, a character needs to have a value where what if they lose it, how does it affect them? Because ultimately, like I have when I have my dog, uh, I would do anything to keep that dog safe, right? That's why I spent a lot of money on vets. That's why I fed him I fed him raw food diets, right? Because what was at stake? I don't want to lose my dog. I love my dog, all these other things, right? So if I introduce the dog in my ordinary world of a novel, it's I would develop that relationship. I would show how important that relationship is with, I know it's a dog, but at the same time, it's a dog. So if something happens, the house is on fire in the story. When the character runs in to save the dog, you're not like, that dog, should have let that dog go. You're like, no, I get it. I would have died for that dog too, because you're having the empathy. You understand that relationship and the connection. Okay. The other thing is you want to laying the emotional foundation. The emotional tone of the ordinary world matters because it sets up contrast. The disruption that follows should feel significant, and this can only happen if readers are emotionally invested in the protagonist's original ordinary life. Whether it's a peaceful routine, a restless dissatisfaction, or an unfamiliar longing for something greater, the ordinary world should set up the emotions that will be affected by the upcoming events. This has to do mainly with if a character is longing for something, like, oh, I want to see the world, right? And we could start relating with that empathy, but like their life makes it so they can't. They have a job, but they don't make enough money. They have bills and all these other things. Life is holding them back, whatever the case may be. And then maybe the story is them ultimately, the inciting incident is maybe they get a ticket from their families, like, we're going to watch the kids. You and your husband, or you and your wife, or you and your partner are going to go to wherever. Just get out of here. Go. It's a week long. We took care of the whole family, took care of it. Go do you. Right. And now you're like, oh, and now they get to kind of experience. And now everything is like a true gift for them. And if you can set that up, they're yearning, they're longing for that kind of world to, I always wanted to visit Italy. Right. If you can really set that up emotionally, then everything pays off for their first experiences every time they see something new in Italy in the story. So it's important to set that tone. If it is that they have a peaceful life, you want to set up how good that life is, how close those relationships are, how important everything is. And then when you disrupt it by, say, taking away that peace, then you understand what they're losing too. So that's very important. Okay. Now, why does the ordinary world matter, though? The plot point one, okay, the ordinary world before the disruption happens, right, uh, is indeed the backbone of your story because it will establish normalcy before everything changes, and this sets up the baseline for who a character is, introduces the potential stakes, as we said earlier, and without a clear sense of the ordinary world, the disruption that follows will lack impact. It won't have the strength or the weight that makes it interesting. You want to see the character's world get disrupted. Now, readers need to see what the protagonist has and what they embrace and love and care for, what they love or struggle with, and what they might lose. By clearly establishing their world, you make the coming change feel more meaningful. So, utilize the plot point as an opportunity to make readers care about the protagonist and the world they live in and the people around them. So, by showing them in the ordinary environment, with their strengths, their flaws, their relationships, establishing positions, you can create an emotional bond that will carry through the rest of the narrative. It's much easier to root for someone when you know what they've already experienced. That's why if you have like a quick, loose, or weak intro, even if it's a chapter or three chapters, and you're not really showing, very important, showing who these characters are and what they care about and their relationships, it'll make it harder to really connect with them, especially when you start disrupting it, because it's like, well, I didn't like that character anyway, or that other character was annoying, so who cares? Some tips for writing. Pop on. You want to keep it engaging. The ordinary world shouldn't feel boring, even if it's depicting a character's routine. Use rich details, character traits, quirks, interesting interactions between characters, etc., to keep readers invested in the protagonist's life. Rich details. These are the world building elements. These are the plot elements. These are the moments that really explore who the character is through their development. The character traits and quirks and their positions allow these things to breathe through the pages and who the characters are by their choices to do or not do, say or not say, what they don't say, what they do, and what they don't do. It's so important. And the interesting interactions between characters, this is what dialogue is important, but it's the behavior and the purpose of their interaction. There's a difference between two characters interacting, going, hey, we got to move the plot along. Do you want to go get some deli later? Oh, yes, I would love to get deli. And it's like, well, we got to get them to the deli because they're going to meet the meet cute and meet the love interest. So the best friend's like, let's go get deli. And the protagonist is like, yeah. That moment isn't interesting and it doesn't carry weight. It's just how do we move from this point to the next point? I want to introduce the best friend of the protagonist and their relationship. So they're going to be like hanging out at the house. The best friend wakes up and it's like, "Oh, you're here already." And the best friend's like, "Yeah, of course I am. Hey, how's it going?" And they're like, "All right, I'm hungry. You want to get food? Yeah, how about the deli?" Like there's no weight to that. There's no depth to it. So you want to make sure that the interactions of the characters are interesting. How do you do that? Great question. Challenge one another. Establish positions from all the characters involved, two or more characters. Even one character can be challenged technically by their scenarios or their desires or their misfortunes. And then push back on it. Push back on your characters. It's okay. If a character goes, "I'm hungry," take away their money. I forgot my wallet. And then the friend says, "You know what? I got it." And you know what's crazy? Allow that friend to put their credit card in and it doesn't go, or the debit card and it doesn't go. Now they can't get the food. So how do they get food? Right? And then that leads to something, right? Maybe now, because they can't get food, there's somebody there and they go, "You guys, what's going on?" It's like, "We just ordered our food. They gave us all our food, but schmuck over here left his wallet at home and my credit card just didn't work." And then the person goes, "You know what? I got it." And now that person becomes a character in the story, or it could become the love interest, potential love interest. So they're everything is no, you're pushing back on them and they have to get through the embarrassment of it. And how they get through the embarrassment develops your characters and it keeps it engaging. All right. We say this all the time on this show, on this channel. Show, sometimes tell. Okay. I don't believe in show, don't tell. I believe in show, sometimes tell, because you need context, right? So rather than directly telling the reader who the protagonist is, use their actions, routines, and relationships to illustrate what kind of a person they are and what their life is like. Believe it or not, who you hang around with becomes the world you live in, but it's also a reflection of who you are. If you hang out with crappy people, you might be crappy, because if you're good, you might be like, "These people are crappy." If you're a really good person and you're hanging out with good people, it'll only elevate those aspects of you. However, you could be someone who's highly motivated hanging out with people who are not motivated at all, and the character feels isolated and stuck and like, "I feel like I'm not doing anything with my life." And the reason is because they have to acknowledge that they're around people that just want to play video games all day. Not that playing video games is bad, but I mean, like, if they're not playing video games to do anything, they're not on Twitch, they're not trying to make money with it, it's not a career. They just like playing 9 to 10 hours a day of video games every single day because they want to block out the world. Now it's like, okay, maybe this might not be what the main protagonist wants. They might want to have a career or something like that. You don't know. So you show this world and it establishes things by challenging their viewpoints and positions. It's better to show than it is to tell, but sometimes you do need to tell. This is a chance to show your reader who they are by what they do or don't do, say or don't say. But most importantly, it establishes their positions on things, and we get to watch the characters make choices based on those established positions. And finally, set up contrast. Keep in mind that the ordinary world is the starting point that will eventually be contrasted against the extraordinary journey to come. Make sure readers have enough context to appreciate how drastically things will change for the protagonist. Okay, think of Lord of the Rings. Lord of the Rings. Okay, so Frodo and his world is highly established. His ordinary world and him being in the Shire and the party and saying goodbye to Bilbo Baggins and all these other elements. Who Gandalf is, the relationships between all of them. The relationships between Bilbo and Frodo is really it's basically it's fully established before Bilbo's like, "I'm out." Okay, so you want to establish all these elements so that your characters are grounded in the ordinary world. All right. Final thoughts. Okay. Remember, the ordinary world is not just a filler. It's the emotional anchor of your narrative that propels and pushes the story forward. Because you can't have story unless you're filtering it through the experiences and choices of your characters. And you can't have emotions and choices unless you establish the positions. So, the more vivid and engaging you make this baseline, the more impactful the disruptions and transformations will be throughout the narrative. So, take the time to establish your character's normal life so readers feel the weight of every change that comes. Because the more you establish, the more you can push back. Plot point one is the foundation upon which your entry story is built. It's where you establish a protagonist's world, routine, and relationships, setting up normalcy that will soon be disrupted. A well defined ordinary world gives readers a chance to understand and connect with the protagonist, making the disruption feel all the more powerful. And again, the more emotionally invested your readers are in this starting point, the more they will feel the stakes as the story of your narrative unfolds through the characters' experiences and choices. This plot point isn't about filling pages with routine, it's about showing who your characters are before everything changes and what's truly at stake when their world is going to be disrupted. Again, the ordinary world doesn't have to be mundane or cliched. Just like the opening of Saving Private Ryan, where we, as the audience, are thrust into a powerful and emotional moment of your character's ordinary world, or I should say, just like the opening of Saving Private Ryan, where we, the audience, are thrust into a powerful and emotional moment with the war. Your characters and their ordinary world can be intense, dramatic, or even filled with tension. It doesn't have to be a war, but they could be in the middle of dealing with something. This doesn't mean every story needs a dramatic battle scene, but rather that the ordinary world should reflect your character's unique experiences and struggles in a way that captivates the reader. For example, a character could show up, they get out of a car, they open the gates, and the inside of the store is on fire. And now you have Clerks 2, right? That's the ordinary world. You would think that disrupts everything, but it doesn't. It is not the disruption yet, but it is showing that everything is. And then they establish a true ordinary world where they work at the restaurant. I will say this before I conclude: don't feel confined to a simple day in the life. Use this as an opportunity to make your protagonist's normal world dynamic and compelling. Try things, challenge things, embrace the weird. Whether it's a soldier on a battlefield, an explorer on the brink of discovery, or a single parent juggling countless responsibilities, the ordinary world can be anything but truly ordinary. Make it engaging, add a sense of motion, movement, and use it to give your reader a true sense of what's at stake. Because when you're approaching the ordinary world in this way, it will help your narrative stand out and draw readers in right from the beginning. And I should say this: writing the ordinary world can be challenging, but it's also an opportunity to be creative. Think of ways to make your protagonist's life interesting, even in routine. There's room for quirk, humor, or introspective. Practice adding details that make your character's world unique and memorable. It's okay to try things because remember, it's all made up, it's fake. You're a writer. You can add things and then take them out if they don't work. All I'm saying is, you got this. Take the time to understand your protagonist's normal life so you could use that as a launch pad for the extraordinary journey ahead. Next video, we'll go over plot point 2, the inciting incident. Question: how does your protagonist's ordinary world set the stage for their upcoming journey? What elements of their current life will make the disruption more impactful? In the comments below. Like what you saw today, but you haven't done so. You're like, hey, man, I'm still not subscribed. Well, subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss out. And please give the thumbs up. Always very helpful. I guess with that, keep developing the right mindset. I'll see you next time. Bye.